All right.
Okay, I see our faces in the OBS. That's always a good sign. Good evening, my friend. And it is evening for you, despite the sunlight pouring into your office there. Lunchtime for me, dinner time for you. Good evening, Abdel. How are you?
Good evening. I'm good. I'm good. How are you doing?
I can't complain. The weather here is finally warming up, except now it's rainy, which I don't quite understand how we went from cold and rainy. At least now it's sort of like warm and rainy, which I guess is a win. I don't know. I don't know. We're coming up on Memorial Day weekend here in the U.S., which is a big 3-day holiday. For a lot of people, it's the official start of summer, and at least in Minnesota, the vast majority of Memorial Days that I can remember are cold, rainy, or cold and rainy. But I guess we'll see. We'll see. Fingers crossed, because I can actually have people over this weekend because my in-laws are fully vaccinated. I'm vaccinated. My wife's vaccinated. My kid got his first shot, so we can have some kind of normalcy. So hopefully the weather
Nice.
cooperates. So
Hopefully.
hopefully.
Yeah, we're having a late summer here in Sweden with like it was hot for some days and then it's cold and it's rained today. For now, the forecast is that's going to rain all the way until the first week of June, and then we will have a proper summer.
There you go.
Hopefully, finger crossed after that. But yeah, as I told you earlier, I'm looking forward for 25th of June, which is the midsummer celebration in Sweden. And that's typically very sunny. And we go out for a picnic, so I hope it will be sunny again this year.
And I got to imagine the actual nighttime comes pretty late on that day at
Oh yeah.
your neck of the woods.
Yeah, like 11:30 p.m. or
Oh
something like
my.
that.
See, I can relate. Minnesota, we're fairly far north, not quite as far north as you are, and so we definitely run into a little bit of that as well. Not, no, it isn't quite as extreme to say the least. Although, as you and I were discussing on the pre-show, it definitely is noticeable when you get those later and later nights and those early mornings as well. And appreciated, frankly. I don't love the gloom that is the winter in our neck of the woods. So fingers crossed that you have a beautiful long weekend there as well.
Yeah.
So now I obviously, you're a friend of mine. I've known you for a while here, but give us your background, your bio, your origin story for the folks who aren't as familiar with you as I am.
Sure. So I am. Let's start from the beginning. I'm Moroccan originally. I was born and raised in Morocco. Did my studies there. I worked in Morocco for like 2 years and a half before joining Google in 2013. I moved to Belgium initially, where I was working in the Google data center, so one of our largest data centers in Europe. I was a hardware operations engineer there. My background is have been always in infrastructure and networking and stuff like that. Although I actually jokingly I studied software engineering, but I never worked as a software engineer. I always liked this idea of using code to interact with hardware and tinkering with hardware in general. And I never wanted actually to go away from the low level stuff, right? And just like write software or websites or API or stuff like that. Although I could probably do that, but my code would be terrible. So 4 years in Belgium, hardware operations engineer. That's like kind of taking care of the Google infrastructure. At some point also I did 2 years in a team which was taking care of the CDN, the YouTube cache infrastructure, which is all over Europe or all over EMEA. So that's Google servers that we use to stream, YouTube videos to people. And then I did a little bit of data analysis work. And then 2017, I joined Cloud, where I am right now. I moved to Sweden, Stockholm, and I'm part of something called PSO, Professional Services Organization. It's kind of the consulting branch of Google Cloud. We're like an engineering department inside the sales department. And we work with some of our largest customers, helping them, implement things on Google Cloud or move applications or stuff like that. And I specialize on the same things. Although I picked up Kubernetes and Istio in the last couple of years, but I still, do the basic stuff like storage, networking, compute, etc., etc. And yeah, that's it.
To paraphrase Alan Kay, people who are serious about software build their own hardware. So that just shows your dedication to software, that you mostly build your own hardware. And Master Gibb is with us this afternoon for him. Good afternoon, Spencer. Good to see you with us there, my friend. So that's fascinating to me because I've spent most of my career doing software and, architecture, building apps, and my interaction with infrastructure was basically to say to someone like you, hey, I need a server like that can do this. And then I don't know, magic happens and a server appears. And then I joined Pivotal, now VMware, and all of a sudden I'm knee deep in infrastructure and have a much greater appreciation, frankly, for what goes on behind the scenes. It, what do you think are some of the common misconceptions for someone like me with my architect hat on when I'm hanging out with my infrastructure fellas and they're saying, "Hey, what you're asking for is actually really complicated, dude."
Yeah, a very good question. I think that a lot of times people don't understand that regardless of where you're going to run your application, there is a bunch of hard drives and servers that needs to exist for you to run that application, right?
Zeros and ones somewhere.
Exactly. This famous quote of like, there is no cloud, it's just somebody else's computer. It's basically true, right? Because you're running on somebody else's computer.
Yep.
And I think so in my experience, I had my fair share of interaction with developers, which ask for some crazy things like, oh, just give me a server. I'm going to run this super duper business critical application. And I'm like, you want to run it on a single server. So you just expected that thing to run 100% of the time, to always have network, to never go down, right? That's essentially what you're expecting.
Well, that's your job. It's not supposed to go down. That's
exactly. Why, exactly. And so in my interaction with developers, or especially around architecting for like high availability or disaster recovery, there are these like, people don't understand that. I mean, I think you like, since you have a long experience, you came to this stage now, this way of thinking of we have to design applications such a way that they are ephemeral, or the underlying, at least, infrastructure is ephemeral. Right. It can go away and come back at any moment in time, which shouldn't impact our application. So how do we architect around that? We're not anymore in the mainframe. You kind of build a server and then you go in and you check up, and then it's like have been up for like 3 years, right, and 70 days and 22 hours. That's not the case anymore, right? Like now it's all about distributed computing. It's all about ephemeral hardware. It's all about stuff that can go away at any moment in time. Your application should be self-healing, self-auto-scaling, et cetera, et cetera. And then I think the other one was like, like one of the funniest things to me, which I discovered a couple of years ago, is this fallacies of network. So it's like the 8 myths so that people think of, like, the network is always available. There is no latency, stuff like that. So I think that a lot of times, I am of a firm belief that developers should be taught a little bit of infrastructure.
Yeah.
Should be educated about it, at least, right? They should understand how servers work and how hardware works and how virtualization works and stuff like that, and should not only kind of shield themselves to this abstraction layer, which is like, oh, I'm just gonna focus on writing my app and then I deploy it on somebody else's infrastructure. That's not my problem anymore. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand the consequences of these distributed applications. The speed of light is still a thing. And if I put my data over here and I put the stuff that acts on that data way over there, I've just added latency into the picture, and I'm going to have some grumpy customers. And, so it is, I agree with you. It's important for us to understand. We don't have to be experts on it, but to at least appreciate what are the consequences of that. And I do think that's where having good lines of communication between architecture, development, and infrastructure is really important. And I've been kind of harping on this point lately, that we need to look at software as a more collaborative game, and that we as a team need to be judged on the output. That it isn't, let's judge developers by velocity and let's judge our SREs by uptime. Well, no, let's do a consensus. The whole team gets judged based on, did you get features and functionality into production or not, as opposed to the individual aspects of it. But,
yes,
that's fascinating.
So, like, a funny story that happened before I went on vacation last week is I was working with one of our customers, and we're helping them debug, of course, DNS problem, because it's always DNS, right? And so they were running Kubernetes. Kubernetes has like a built-in DNS plugin, and it has some limitations. So their application was basically like just making a lot of DNS hits. There was no caching. So obviously the DNS servers go like, oh, we cannot handle this anymore, right? So we reach our maximum concurrent number of requests, and the application failed, right? And of course, with application fail, what people will do is that they will give you the output of their Java's like stack, and then you look at it and like, yeah, I don't really understand what's like this error is not helping
pointer?
me.
What?
Exactly. And then I was talking with developers, and I was like, well, I mean, you could just do some retries, I guess, like in your app. And they were like, no, but why would you want to do retries? Why do we want to change the app? Like the DNS have to. Yeah, well, that's not how things work, right? And it took like 2 hours in a call to try to convince people that, like, if you have a dependency on an external, because people actually don't understand that your reliance on DNS is exactly the same thing as your reliance on a third-party API.
Right.
So if you're using a payments API on your app and that API is not responding, what do? Well, you have to implement retries, obviously, right? So you have to treat DNS the same way. It's a third-party dependency that you have no control over. And so like people just go like, oh no, my PayPal API, I'm just going to do retries because, they're going to, reduce my number of requests that I can make. So I have to be able to get the payment through. But DNS, no, that's not my problem. That's the infrastructure.
Well, and your customers don't care. I mean, that's the other part of this that I think we lose track of. At the end of the day, if our customer can't complete their order or do whatever it is they do with our site, they don't care that it's not my problem. It's this other thing. Like, so I use your service. I don't care what you rely on. As far as I'm concerned, you're to blame. And it's important for us to again remember that it's this collective problem, not these individual problems. But we ran into a DNS issue a few weeks ago. I think it might have been a Monday. I can't remember. But my son's like, "Hey, Dad, can we watch some Star Wars thing?" I'm like, "Sure." And I flip on the streaming service and it just clocks. And I'm like, "Well, that's weird. Try another one." It clocks. Then I try a third one and it worked. I'm like, "Okay, so it's not my internet connection." So then I started doing some other sleuthing and I'm like, well, the cloud provider is still up. And so I hit all three of them and 2 no response. GCP was up, by the way. I got all green for GCP. And it was only a little later that I figured out, oh, we got a DNS issue because I can get to some sites, but not others. It's like, all right, okay, I see what's going on here. I guess we just have to wait. And it's a little scary how much critical infrastructure, critical things depend on, well, if that goes down, a third of the internet goes with it. What do we do about that?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, there are a few very, very, I mean, this is a good example of DNS. If DNS goes down, the whole internet goes down, but there are a few other like protocols and services that, I mean, SSL. You remember that vulnerability a few years back, there's like one person maintaining SSL, which like the whole internet depends on, including some military stuff and some like super sensitive, informations. And then there's one dude in his basement maintaining this, and then no one thinks that that's a problem. It's very funny. The open source world is full of these kind of examples as well, like things maintained by a single person. If that person is hit by a bus,
right.
No one to maintain the thing.
Well, you mentioned earlier, the fallacies of network computing. That's not a new concept. I mean, I don't remember when that originally came out, but I want to say it was somewhere in the 90s. And yet, before we were even remotely as networked as we are today, and yet there's still generations of software folks who don't seem to have internalized those issues. And, I don't know if that's an education problem. I don't know if that's an awareness problem. I think to a certain extent, we're a victim of our own success because, well, it just works. I didn't even think it could ever go down. It's like power in the developer world. I can't tell you that we had a power outage of maybe a couple months ago, and I was just like, this is so weird because it's been years since we've had a power outage, and you just rely on, of course it'll work. It's like, yeah, but it doesn't have to.
Yeah, it might fail.
It could.
I mean, it's definitely an education. I do not remember from my times when I was doing my master's, any of our teachers talking about any of these things, right? Like even in the networking classes, like no one have ever talked about. Well, we studied latency as a concept, but no one have really explained what's the implication of that concept in the grand scheme of things, right? I think there's a problem. I think in education is that basically we take this thing called computer science, which is a bunch of basic components that have to interact with each other in order for things to work. And we split it into classes that are taught by individual teachers, but they're kind of isolated from each other, right? And then you study operating systems, and you also study software. And like you don't have somebody to tell you, well, this is how your OS class is related to your programming class, right? And it's kind of what I'm noticing right now is that there is a more and more. Certainly in Morocco, I'm not sure about the US, but certainly in Morocco, there is the education system, especially in computer science, is actually trying to do a catch-up game with everything that's coming up new. So I'm not seeing people on LinkedIn adding me that are like students in cloud computing or students in IoT and all this kind of like fancy words. I think universities are trying to catch up by putting like fancy titles for their masters so they can attract people. And a lot of times I'm like, are these people actually being taught fundamentals, or they are
Right.
being taught some specific implementation like AWS as in your masters,
Right.
and then you're like out to the market because that's what. And I think like universities are missing out in the sense that they are not able to understand that computer science is something that just changes all the time. And then the only way you could produce good engineers is by teaching them fundamentals and teaching them how to learn the fundamentals to learn new things, and not being specific about specific implementations or specific technologies, right? So yeah, that's just my observation now.
No, that's a great point. I feel like we get so fixated in this industry on whatever the latest buzzword happens to be. And you brought up Kubernetes already. I mean, that's like somebody's out there going, bingo, there's just no getting around it. And I think it's because we love playing with new toys. But to your point, the fundamentals have a much longer lifespan. And I think we're all better off focusing more of our energy on these longer ranging skills. My friend Adib sort of phrases it in terms of lifespans. Some skills have a 5 to 10 year lifespan, some 15 to 20, and some are evergreen. You should invest more of your time in the evergreen, but we seem to fixate in technology on those things that are short hit 5-year kind of things, the latest JavaScript framework, the latest whatever's getting a lot of buzz, and to our own detriment, quite frankly. So, and Spencer says DNS, why client-side load balancing will always be a thing.
Of course it will always be a thing.
But what's fascinating to me is how do we convince people that this fundamentals presentation, class, talk, book, whatever it is something they should spend their time on? I think that's one of the things I struggle with, is I feel like there is this huge wealth of information that we need to pass on to that next generation of developers, and it's not clear to me how I sort of get them interested in that when they've got these other buzzwords, nipping at their heels.
I think I did this kind of experiment personally when people come to me like back in the days when we used to go on conferences, like especially back in Morocco, there are a lot of students that come to me, and they kind of, because like my story of how I made it to Google is kind of interesting and weird in a way. I didn't study in like a prestigious school, and I made it to Google, and a lot of people can relate to that. Like this dude who just came from the public national education system now works at Google, right? And a lot of people come to me to ask me these questions, and I did this simple experiment, which is like, just ask the person, explain to me how internet works. Explain to me in details what happened when you fire up your browser and you type www.google.com. Explain it to the
series of tubes.
If you're not able to explain that in details, that you're missing out on the fundamentals.
Sure.
And I think it's like companies or the industry is also not helping because, like bring up LinkedIn and look up any random job in any random companies. I'm not talking about FANG and big companies. I'm talking about like small kind of consulting. And you will see that they are asking for somebody who is senior, but who knows JavaScript and Java and Python and Go and 7 programming languages, 3 cloud providers, and they're going to pay you like a junior salary, right? Which is ridiculous. So I think that the industry is not helping as well because they're just wanting people to know everything.
Yeah.
And that's just fundamentally not possible, right?
Yep.
And so when people come to the industry or come to the field, I think that people are kind of lost because they see like, okay, well, what are we actually being taught in university? And what is this job titles telling me I should know, right? And that's actually a problem. Frankly, I don't know what's the fix to that. I think that we should... I think that there is one thing also that is important to keep in mind, is that the way software engineering is done in big companies is fundamentally different than how it's done in like small companies or consulting companies, right? In companies like traditional kind of banking or like retail companies and stuff like that, in their IT department, you're going to have your architect and you're going to have your team lead and you're going to have your functional consultant, analyst, whatever. And then in order to build a feature, that's going to be 5 people, 1 person deciding what the feature will look like, 1 person deciding how the UX would look like, and then 1 person deciding how it's going to be implemented, and then the actual developer at the end of the line writing the code, right? While when you're working in big companies, it's usually a software engineer doing all of this, except probably the UX part, right? But they are designing, they're writing the product, we call it PRD at Google, they call it different in different companies, but they're writing the whole document that explains how is this going to be implemented, how the API will look like. There's probably a more senior kind of tech lead looking at that doc and saying, okay, change this, change that, blah, blah, blah. but the person is going to be implementing everything, including shipping it to production. So they own the end-to-end delivery of a feature or a piece of software, which I think is good in the sense that what you need for that type of jobs is a software engineer. It's somebody who's able to understand what needs to happen and make it happen.
Right.
While with that other model where you have 7 people and 3 layers of decisions, you are basically looking for people who know how to write code, which I usually call developers, right? And that's kind of where, like, that's the kind of companies where you have this like full stack Java, blah, blah, jobs, things, right? DevOps, DevSecOps type of titles. And then people, when they look at what's available in the job market, they go like, okay, well, maybe Google and Facebook are, I mean, the not super ambitious people, I'd say, they would go like, okay, maybe Facebook and Google are out of my leads. I'm just going to look into these small companies. Oh, they're looking for 6 programming languages and they want to be full stack. So I'm just going to look for a master to teach me to be a full stack developer, right?
Sure.
So I think that's where part of the problem is.
I always think we sort of misapply what we mean by full stack. I mean, always the way I've looked at it is we want someone who is willing to engage with any part of the code base. You know, I mean, most of the teams I've been a part of, you just don't have enough room for that specialization of, hey, all I do is, you know, front end. We just don't have enough of that work to make that be a viable solution. So you want people who are willing to engage with different parts of the code base, but also recognizing that, you know, it turns out Kathy's a lot better at the database than I am. So I'm going to pair with her so I can hopefully learn and get better at this. But, you know, it turns out that I'm better at the front end. And so I'm going to pair with her for the front end stuff and I'll help share my knowledge that way. You know, so recognizing that there are still some differences in where our expertise lies, but it's more that willingness to engage as opposed to just washing your hands of 80% of the code. But I don't think this unicorn developer exists that knows all these different languages and different cloud providers and Kubernetes and this. And I mean, heat death of the universe is going to happen before you can learn all that. And by the way, when you find that individual, the salary request is probably outside of your range.
Of course. Yeah. And if you find a person that has a resume that says they know all of these things, it's probably because they just know the quick start guide of every single technology, right?
Or they might be exaggerating, we'll just say, what their skill set is, just a smidge. You know, yeah, I looked at that once. I flipped a book open, and so yeah, I'm an expert on that. So
yeah. I appreciate when I meet people who are in the tech industry and who are not actually haven't even been educated on tech. Like you have a lot of people who are coming from chemical engineering, mechanical engineering. Like I know people who are coming from sociology and they're developers. And these people have a different way of approaching the problem because like fundamentally computer science is not complicated. It's not rocket science. It's not super complicated to learn. Right?
It ain't brain surgery, as they say.
Exactly. It's not brain surgery. Exactly. So if you have the right mental capacity and the right way of approaching it, you can learn it and you can learn it relatively fast. Depends on the person, right? So, I mean, the fact that we have people who haven't been educated on computer science working in computer science is a proof that like the way we're educating people in certain parts of the world, in certain universities, is not probably optimal, right? And we are running the risk of basically producing the next generation of truck drivers that are going to be replaced by robots, right? Because like, you know, there is this whole movement now of no code, where like very soon people will be able to build websites without even touching a line of CSS or HTML, right? And that's actually scary to me because we're like, oh, all this software, these front-end engineers were just producing now out of universities, they're going to be jobless in like 5 years, or probably not jobless. They will learn and adapt and
they'll
do
have
something
to evolve.
else.
Yeah,
exactly. And I think that's the fundamental problem is that if you don't equip people with the tools they need to be able to learn anything they need in the future, then you're running into that risk, because you're getting people out to the market with specific technologies that, to your point, are going to be obsolete in 5 or 10 years.
Right. And that's what we should be doing in really any graduate or undergraduate program, is sort of teaching you how to learn, because things are going to evolve rapidly, and that's the reality here. And I'll echo your sentiment that I know a lot of great engineers in this industry who do not have a quote unquote traditional computer science background. It's either you have that sort of problem solving puzzle, you like playing around with that, or you don't. And what you studied in college may or may not really be relevant to whether you're any good at doing this at scale. And
Yeah.
I think one of my friends, actually, a guy I wrote a couple books with, is a chemistry major. He's a pretty darn good developer,
There you
and
go.
I think it's really instructive that there is no one path to
Yeah.
being in this industry, being good at this job. And I think that's something that I've had to counsel some of my students on, even in this semester in particular, which has been interesting.
Yeah.
Now we've hinted at this a few times, but tell me more about Morocco. Growing up in Morocco, I had the great fortune of traveling there. It's where you and I met a few years ago, and to say that it's an intense experience, certainly for for someone who comes from my side of the planet, would be an understatement. But I can only imagine what that had to be like growing up. So what was that like? How what? Let's delve into that part of the origin story a bit.
Yeah. So I was born in Fes. It's the third largest city in the country, and it's actually the second oldest city. It's about 12 centuries old.
I say that's saying
Pretty,
something.
yeah. We met in Marrakesh during DevOps 2018, right?
I think so.
So that's I think is the fourth largest city, and it's slightly older than Fes as well. Um, so I grew up in Fes. I've been to like public school, like the equivalent in Morocco, in the US of like high school. We call it baccalaureate because our education system is following the French education system. So you do this like primary school, secondary school, and then baccalaureate, or we call it lycée. So it's like 12 years. I was fortunate that I never actually had to take a bus to go to school because by the time I hit primary school age, there was a primary school that's 2 minutes walk from my house, my parents' house, and then by the time I hit the secondary school, like they opened a new one, and by the time I hit like the high school, they opened the new one. So I was like, exactly. So I like for 12 years I just had to commute for 4 minutes a day to go to school. I took my high school degree in science, and then I did like a super untraditional. So in Morocco, we have the traditional kind of universities or engineering schools where you can go and do like 3 years to get a bachelor, 2 years to get a master's, and that's how typically pretty much everybody that I know have done their they're teaching or they're learning. I've been to a school which is special. We have this massive network of schools in Morocco that are called professional schools, and they are supposed to teach you a craft. So you have degrees like mechanics and like car mechanics, right? Or like welders, or like you can teach you be like a woodworker, or like a handyman, a plumber, stuff like that. And they have few degrees which are IT. So my first degree that I did in one of these schools was telecommunications, so like really, really basic, signal transmitting stuff, electronics, and a little bit of programming. So I studied there for 2 years. I finished up. I wanted to go to the job market. Like it's terrible in Morocco. If you're not in Casablanca or in Rabat or in Tangier in the north, and you are in tech, you're screwed. Like you cannot find tech job in any other city because like most cities doesn't have. So, and yeah, for your information, like 90% of the tech jobs in Morocco are basically consulting. They're like outsourcing.
Sure.
We have a lot of all the big companies that are doing like Capgemini, Accenture. They have offices in Morocco, and they just like outsource from Canada or from France to Morocco. And so then I was like, okay, so what do? I have to move to Casablanca, but it's going to be like shitty salary with my, 2 years degree, or I work in, or so like I was looking at the options, like, okay, I'm just going to go to another school similar to the first one and just do another degree. And that's exactly what I did. So essentially I have 2 degrees over 4 years, one in telecommunication electronics and one in programming. And then the same question came up again. So 2 years later, like, what do I do? Right? Like 2 degrees from 2 different companies. This is not a school. This is not bachelor. It's not equivalent to anything, right?
Sure.
And so then there was a private school opening in my city, and I just joined it. My parents paid for it, and I did my master's there. And that was about the time when I started getting involved in the open source movement. Initially, it started with Ubuntu. So I was the lead for the Ubuntu local, the local user group, essentially of Canonical in Fes, in my city. So we started that whole like open source movement. We were going to like Linux days and universities. I've spoken in a lot of universities all over the country. Then I finished up, I did my internship, and then I went to work, right? And that's basically was a data center that opened in the country, the first kind of ISP neutral data center. They were looking for somebody pretty much to do everything. It's like a startup, right? So they were looking for somebody who's willing to work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, just like do everything, right? So I joined the data center. We had nothing. We had no customers. We had like 2 server rooms empty. There was 1 server inside that I had set up to install our own ticketing system and ERP and stuff like that. And we didn't have power for a month.
Oh God.
So our power was actually a generator outside that we just plugged into the office. And there was like this whole kind of WhatsApp group thing where somebody is asking, so who's bringing up fuel today for the generator?
I was going to say that had to be part of your pipeline, like a literal pipeline bringing in fuel to run the generator.
Pretty much, yeah. And because we were like far out from Casablanca, we were near the Casablanca main airport, which is like 35 kilometers outside the city. So we had to commute by cars. So I worked there for 2 years and a half. We went from being 4 people, me, my colleague who actually hired me, my boss and his admin, to like 45 people in the space of 2 years and a half.
Wow.
The company grew significantly because we kind of offered something that no one else offered. Before us, there was only the ISPs that you could rent out, server space from. But if you go to ISP A, they're not going to allow you to like have the fiber from ISP B. That's not going to happen. And they had like terrible services. They would charge you for like, in the data center world, you have this thing called smart hands, which is you open a ticket and somebody goes do something on your servers, like restart the server. They would charge you for that. We said like, you host your server, that's included. That service is included for free. How many times you want per month? It doesn't matter. We won a lot of companies. We grow, as I said, very fast. In 2 years and a half, they were actually planning to build a second data center because some companies were like, yeah, we want to work with you, but we need disaster recovery. So please build a second site so we can have our primary, secondary type, installations. I remember at the time, like internet prices in Morocco they are still expensive, but like internet prices for companies are extremely expensive. Like a 1 megabyte symmetric line was something like $500 per month. It's crazy with like a 3 nines SLA. And so I remember that when we were planning to build the second data center, so we obviously needed connectivity between both sites, right? Yeah. And the second data center is like 100 kilometers away. So we went to one of the ISPs and we were like, we want a fiber. We want like 10 gigabit connection between. And the ISP was like, no, we don't do that. I was like, what do you mean you don't do that? And they were like, literally, no one have ever asked us to do this ever. And we're like, well, we want it. Like here is the money, just build it.
Pay
and they were
for
like, no, yeah, exactly. And they were like, and then it was so weird because I discovered a lot of things. It was a very rich experience in the sense that I discovered how people work, how the Moroccan culture is around work, how public institutions work, because we were working with lots of public institutions through RFPs, how banks works, how people actually approach work in general. I was fortunate that my first experience within this company, I was always surrounded by Germans because my company was partner of a German company, and we were the representative in Africa, right? So they would buy, companies in Africa would buy that German company equipment through us. And so I had to be trained by these Germans on installing the hardware, commissioning the hardware and stuff like that. And I started to learn from them that when you have a screwdriver, which is a flathead screwdriver, you use a flathead screw to unscrew that thing. You don't use a knife.
Nope.
So you use the proper tools to do the work. And that's something that I'm still like using up to today. Like if I don't have the tools, I'm not going to touch anything.
Right.
So I sort of kind of started working in this like kind of balloon, which was like shielding me outside from the Moroccan work culture. So my boss was American, while Moroccan with American origins. He was actually in the US for 15 years, worked in a lot of startups. The Germans I was working with, so kind of learned quite a lot of things. I learned like to be precise, to be like, straight with your work, to be clear about what you need, and then I worked quite a lot. So that was Casablanca, which is, the biggest city actually in the country. 2 years and a half. And for me, it was like that job was so good that I was thinking like, I am not going to find something better than this. And I obviously have something different about my way of approaching work is I could easily have joined a bank in Morocco with that experience I had. I could just like go to a bank and just basically slack over and not do anything and get like 50 days of paid holidays per year, which is crazy. We have 50 day bank workers in Morocco get 50 days. You get like access to some super good mortgages if you want to buy the house. Like nice life, right?
You realize that any American viewers of this are going to be looking going 50 days of holiday, like in the
I
US.
know.
2 weeks
Paid
of
holidays.
vacation would be, for at least a starting gig is pretty typical. And don't get me started on how few actual holidays we celebrate in this country, but that's a
Yeah.
topic for a different show, I think.
I know. And so the only thing, and this is the funny part, the only thing that prevented me from going to a bank was very simple. I hate wearing ties. And when you work in a bank, you
Okay.
have to wear a tie, regardless of what you do.
I'm out.
Right? I was like, no, I am not gonna do. Like, funny story. I had shirts and the tie in the company car all the time for the meetings. So I was always in t-shirts.
Yep.
And whenever I have to meet a company that's like more traditional, I was just like park, put the tie, put the shirt, go in, do the meeting, get out, get rid of that, and just go on with my life.
It's funny you mentioned that, how much seeming significance we place on that, because I early part of my career I supported our investments folks, and so they were all, many of them were wearing full suits, certainly a lot of sport coats. And so in that job, it was a button up, was kind of that's what you wear. And when I moved out of that, it was more polos. But the role I'm in now as sort of this dev advocate kind of thing, if I roll up in a button up shirt, I'd have no credibility, because what you must be a sales guy, and so it's been this interesting shift from wearing more dressy clothes to, well, t-shirts, hoodies. I feel like if I'm wearing a polo, I'm maybe pushing it a little bit. It's funny to me how we attach the significance to something that shouldn't be, but that's how we roll.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of how do you influence people, especially in like a DevRel job where you have to do talking and speaking and conferences and stuff like that. A big part of how do you influence people is how do you relate to them, or how do they relate to you, right? And I think if you walk up on stage in front of a crowd with like a button-up shirt and a tie, people are not gonna, because they're gonna go like, that doesn't sound like a tech person. That sounds like a salesperson. It's actually very bad, because it's still we're just putting stereotypes.
Right.
But I think it is what it is, because the tech industry have this story of tech people are super geeky, hoodies, and it certainly is not helped with what Hollywood is doing with the movies, like they are like enforcing the stereotype in a way. So if you watch something like Silicon Valley or something like that, like
just thinking of that when you said stereotype.
The startup,
Silicon Valley, yep.
Yeah, the startup founder is only putting up a button-up shirt when he's going in front of the investors.
Right.
But most of the time, he's there in t-shirt. So for better or worse, it is bad. But I think I like to be on the side where I don't have to wear a tie. Me too. Honest.
Yeah, you and I were talking about that on the pre-show. That I'm hopeful that we are done with restrictive clothing when the pandemic is over. That we'll invent some kind of elastic waistbanded thing that we'll all agree is legitimate for office wear. But that's a future problem, I think, for us. But
yeah, I hope so.
So you sort of casually throw out how old some of these places are in Morocco, and it's something that I get a kick out of as an American. I remember I was in the UK several years ago, and I had lunch with one of my colleagues, and he took me to this pub that used to be like a tea house or something, and it was, I want to say, the second oldest tea house in England. And so he points at the Keystone, which is 14 something, and he says, I love bringing you Americans to things that are older than your country. And I just kind of, that's great, Mike, thanks. But it is fascinating to me. I did a walking tour of the old city when I was in Marrakesh, and it's just amazing to see literally centuries worth of things all being in the same place. And you go through the roundabout, and there's everything from the semi truck down to the donkey carriage and everything in between, and it's an intense mix, and it's just fascinating, and something that I really appreciate, because we just don't have that much history, at least as the United States of America. I mean, certainly the continent's been here, but it's fascinating to me to see that, and to see just what that impact of literally thousands of years of all this is. It's just amazing.
Yeah, and I think to your point about being overwhelmed when you are in Morocco, I think to me, I cannot relate to that, because every single Moroccan have grown up in chaos, right? There is chaos everywhere.
Right. Yeah,
it's not probably as chaotic as something like India, but it's 35 million people country, right?
Yep.
Casablanca alone is like 10 million people. Marrakesh is like 3 or 4 million people.
Right.
And especially if you go to the old town, where you have these small, streets, you have donkeys carry on things because you cannot bring cars through these
sidewalk, it blends would be the polite way to put it.
Exactly. And then you have like a 2-meter wide alley with like cars and motorbikes and bikes and people and kids and donkeys and dogs just running everywhere. Exactly.
Well, to your point, as I'm doing this walking tour, there's no street signs, there's no door numbers, and yet everybody knows where things are. Amazon delivers somehow.
Yes.
And in fact, I remember the hotel I stayed at, they give you a cell phone that has their numbers pre-programmed so that if you get lost, which is incredibly easy to do, they will come find you. And, thank goodness, because I eventually kind of got my bearings, but it'd be so easy to get lost in those alleys and sidewalks. And, I remember coming into my hotel, the driver that picked me up at the airport kept calling the hotel. And at one point he finally said to me, I have to make sure there's not a car coming out because there's not enough room for 2 cars. So I have to make sure we time this right. I'm like, oh, okay. Was not expecting that, but cool. And it is so different,
And you have just landed from a 12 hours flight.
Yeah. Well, and that factors into it too. You're kind of jet lagged and you're like, wait, where's like the hotel awning? And it's like, this door is a hotel. Okay. And then you step in and it's like, wow. I mean, there was a couple points where you're thinking, 50-50 chance I'm getting abducted. I don't know. I'm just trusting the person who has the sign with my name on it is, means me no harm. But yeah, I mean, it is an intense experience, and what I'm glad I got to experience, along with the food, which we should definitely talk about food since it's lunchtime for me. One of my favorite stories, you're telling me about this chicken dish that you shared with a friend. Why don't you share that story, because it's one I get a kick out of.
Yes, so I have took a friend of mine to Morocco to visit, and so we flew into Agadir, which is like far south, to one of my favorite cities, coast city, love surfing spots, amazing. So we flew in there, and then we kind of took a car, and the plan was to just drive all the way up to Marrakesh, drive all the way up to Casablanca, and then back to fly back home. And so on the way from, I believe it was Marrakesh to Agadir, we stopped by a gas station, just a regular, side of the highway gas station. And we had a tagine. A tagine is like, one of our Moroccan traditional dishes. For the reference, for the American audience, a tagine is not actually what's in it. It's the name of the dish itself, which is like a clay pot that has a specific form. And it's that we call tagine the pot itself, right? What do you cook in it is whatever you want. And it's typically some sort of meats with some sort of vegetables, right? It could be fish, it could be also vegetarian, it depends what do you like to eat. And so we had this like super traditional, it's called a chicken and pickled lemons, right? It's a pretty traditional Moroccan dish with tons of onions. And she was so impressed. She was like, this is one of the best tagines I had, and it's in a gas station. And I was like, yeah, because that's basically the standard, right? If they are making these things for the Moroccans who are traveling through the highway. So if they're not good, no one will stop there to eat. And actually, what was special about that place is, Morocco is like a super long country, right? And to go from south to north, it's going to be like 12-hour drive, obviously. So there is that special, there are dishes that are kind of common. Everybody knows them. Sure. Like everybody knows the tagine, everybody knows couscous, everybody knows all of these kind of things. But there are stuff that are super traditional and super local. And one of the things that is known in the south of Morocco is this flatbread, which they cook on top of hot stones. So you have an oven and they have these small stones, and then they put the bread directly on top of it. So that's different than the type of bread my mother makes, for example. And that was actually because it's made in a wood oven, and it's smoky and it's special, and that's combined with tagine. She was like blown away. I was like day one. And I was like, you haven't seen anything, just wait. But yeah, I mean, I think to us, Moroccans, food is very important. I mean, I can tell my story. I remember when I grew up, my father used to work as a bus driver. And so he would have 1 week of late shifts and 1 week of like early shifts, right? So our dinner time would change week to week.
Sure.
But then whenever that dinner time is, we always have dinner together. If he's coming back at 10 p.m. from work, we're just gonna wait until 10 p.m. Like no one eats before 10 p.m. There is no such thing as you are hungry. Yes, there is this pot on the stove. Just go get yourself some food and eat. That's not how it works, right? And then when you sit on the table, you have to wait for my grandfather to sit on the table before you start eating. You don't eat before the grandfather is on the table, right?
Okay.
Yeah, and it's like a communal sort of thing where like you're sharing the food. I think you have seen this before. We don't have plates and forks and knives. You just have like a plate in the middle, and everybody just like reach out with their hands. So it's very important. Like food is a very important event in the day. And I like right now I'm older and I have cousins and part of my family, people in my family that have kids. And it's like this new generation of people that's like hooked up to TikTok and Instagram. And when I meet my friends, they just complain about, the kids, they don't want to eat. They just want to eat alone in their rooms and stuff like that. And I was just thinking like that would have never happened in my household. So.
But see, you've just made the most common statement of an older generation to a younger generation. The kids these days.
Exactly.
That's been going on since generations. You go back far enough and you can find people who said, well, writing is terrible because it's going to rot people's brain because they won't have to memorize anymore. And so you won't be able to retain information. And we're all going to be a bunch of, oh my God, you're going to be staring at a piece of paper. Today we'd say you're staring at a screen. So,
Yes.
It's the universal lament.
Yes. I'm considering myself old, so.
I mean, we're all getting older unless, the only alternative to that, which isn't great. So, it balances itself out. You either get older or you stop. And, well, hopefully that won't happen to either of us for many, many, many years. And we get to enjoy many more wonderful dishes.
Hopefully. Yeah. I mean, I think as you are, as you said, as you are getting older, you're kind of appreciating more. It's probably also because like we got into technology pretty early and we are getting to the stage where we're probably appreciating more the parts of our life we're not in front of technology.
Yep.
Because that's like, especially when technology is your main job, then you basically don't want to be on your phone or on your laptop after you have finished work, right? It happens, but like you try to reduce that and try to be like, for example, personally, I am now realizing that I'm more into books, like physical books, than actually reading on my phone or on an e-reader or something like that. I appreciate the time I could just be reading something, learning something without having my phone on me, on my laptop. So yeah, I mean, it's as you said, it's a generational thing. Then the current generation will have something to say about the next one. So
inevitably, I mean, it's funny how a certain style of like funny situation on a sitcom doesn't exist anymore because we all have cell phones. So there'd never be a situation where you get locked on the roof. We were watching some Friends episodes last night. We're trying to take the kid through cultural touch points, and so we binged some Friends last night, and I can't remember which season or which episode, but I think it was Joey and Ross get locked on the roof of their apartment building. Well, what do we do now? And I'm thinking, well, just take out your cell phone and oh, wait, that's right. This was set in a different time, and so it'll be interesting to see what sort of new situations of the comedic variety kind of evolve out of this. But I think every generation says that about the next one, that, you have it so easy. And, I had to walk uphill to school both ways in the snow and I didn't have that cell phone to keep me company. It's just different.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is, like we as human species, we're always trying to make life easier for us. And by doing that, the subproduct of that process is that we're making life easier for the next generation.
Sure.
And so we get, as you said, like this example of like, I had to walk uphill, but like you have it easy. It's because we had to walk uphill, so we had to fix that.
Right.
And by fixing it, we fix it for the next generation.
Right.
And so it's easy for us to just get to this corner where we say like, it was difficult for me, but it's easy for you. No, it's not easy for them. It's like we made it easy for them because we improved.
Well, and now it's just air for them. That's the other side.
Exactly.
I realized very early on that my son has no concept of a network television schedule. Because when he was a little kid, everything was on the DVR. And then as he got older, everything was streaming. And so it's just, well, no, I want to watch XYZ, I'll start watching it and I'll just watch the whole season. You know, at some point, my son realized that my wife and I were watching some show, and he's like, "Well, could I watch?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." And he caught up with us in 3 days or some ridiculous thing because he just kept watching, and
Binge watch the whole thing.
that's a thing that didn't exist when I was his age. You had to wait
Yeah.
till the next episode, and having experienced both, I was talking last week with my friend Tim about this. I like the binging part, and I almost think that the best thing to do is wait until the series ends and then binge it, so you don't have to be
Yes.
there. Oh wait, we're all caught up now. What? And then you forget what was going on in the series.
Yeah, that's actually a very valid point. I like also binging stuff, but I'm kind of like old-ish but young-ish, but like I like, for example, all sorts of very popular American shows like Friends, like Silicon
Yep.
Valley. Like, well, Silicon Valley is kind of newer. Like the I like watching things like HBO, like the daily shows, like John
Yeah.
Oliver and you know Trevor Noah and stuff like that. I like watching all these things. I think that's what I'm realizing now, especially with the daily shows. I like the investigative part of daily shows, right? That's why I love John Oliver so much, because
Yeah.
it's so much more going into putting up a story that he's told in 20 minutes. And it's great that like, I like watching that because it's so informative and you learn something from it. I don't appreciate that much all these like news people kind of talk, like shows just talk about the news in general, like in the
Right.
business area or in the like, I don't know, like art and, you know, Hollywood and like, you know, actors and stuff like that. I don't appreciate that. But I still like, I have watched the Brooklyn 99, right?
Yeah.
I binged it like 2 times.
Yes.
I love that show so much. So yeah. And that's because when
I was going to say, I watched that. My son has watched that. And so there are many times in this household where various Brooklyn Nine-Nine phrases get thrown around. So he and I binge that together. So, and now I think he's probably rewatched it at least once, because that's one thing I've never quite understood is he definitely enjoys rewatching things. And so he just kind of gets on those hooks where he'll watch it again and again and again. It's like, you do realize there's almost unlimited content out there and you're rewatching. All right, you do you, boo. So
sure. Yeah, I think so. Back to my, because you were talking earlier about life in Morocco when I was there.
Yeah.
I grew up with analog dish, right? That's the first kind of thing we got. Like Morocco, when I grew up, we had 2 channels, the first and the second channel. So one was Arabic.
Good naming. It's good naming.
That's good naming. Yeah. Now I think they have like 8 of them, but like the national channels, there was 2.
Sure.
And these are like the ones that are like taxpayers' money channels, right? And then now there are like tons of them. But then, so if you wanted to watch something foreign or like, you know, international, then you have to get a dish. So we got this analog dish initially, and then later on we got like the digital one, right? And that's how actually I learned English, because I just watched, like we have TV channel. There are TV channels that are, I believe, Middle Eastern. I don't know which country specifically, like NBC. I think it's Emirates or something like that, the UAE. And what they do is that they take popular American movies and they would just subtitle them in Arabic, right?
Oh, sure.
I hated that. I would just like, when my parents go to sleep, I sit down, I flip the dish to point to a different satellite which has English content. I would just watch that, right? So that's how I grew up. And then eventually I got internet, and then I started like watching Netflix. Now everybody has accounts everywhere, Netflix,
right.
HBO Max, etc. But like I still appreciate, as you said, this thing of, oh, I want to watch something, I just turn on TV and watch it, right? I don't have to wait like 1 week.
Yeah.
That to the new generation, that sounds like weird. Like
well, how else could it be? What are you talking about? That's just air,
Exactly.
old man. Yeah,
exactly.
I think the same thing about some of the other things we take for granted, like our cell phones. You know, that's one of the funny things. You watch a show from even 15 years ago, 20 years ago for sure, and they take out a flip phone or a giant candy bar phone, and you're like, whoa, what is that strange looking thing? You know, and it is fascinating to me how quickly, you know, that stuff sort of changes over. I mean, my kid just, you know, rectangle of glass is what a phone is. You know, I remember the first time he even saw a flip phone, he just was like, what is this? I don't, you know, you use this to make calls? What is that? You know, it's just, it's so fascinating to see that shift.
Yeah. I just got myself the last Apple Watch 6, And I just bought it like mindlessly. I got it because I like to use it to track my sports, my activities.
Yeah.
And then I sit down one day and I was like, okay, let's look. And I looked into spec and I'm like this thing has like a super powerful CPU in like
Right.
a 40 millimeter square case. Right. It's freaking crazy.
You're thinking, wait a minute, I think the first iPhone was less powerful than this thing I strapped to my wrist.
Exactly. I mean, that thing is probably more powerful than the most basic Mac Air. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
The amount of processing that you can jam in like such a small space. And I'm like, so what's like, there's this like, how to say, like this race to do catch up that like everybody has to produce the next best, most powerful thing. And I'm just thinking like, what's the end, right? I mean, we broke Moore's law, but we're eventually going to get to a limit, right? We're eventually going to get to a point where we cannot put more transistors per millimeter square.
Eventually, right? There has to be a limit. I don't know what it is.
Of course.
But, you know, I mean, there's physics and light and yeah. But to your point, it has been pretty amazing to see what that looks like. And, you know, I think what was the Gates quote about? We always overestimate the next 2 years and underestimate the next 20 or something to that effect. And, you know, I think it's very true that it's amazing. I mean, I've had this conversation with my son about that just wait till you see what things are going to be like for you in 20 years. You know, it's just going to be a whole different world in many ways. So let's, speaking of binging and whatnot, let's transition slightly here. So what have you been? Oh, and I lost my
video. I'm gonna come back. I just need to switch it. I'm using a DSLR which has batteries.
Oh,
so I have to switch.
See, you're fancier than me. I just have the old webcam, because by the time I thought about upgrading, you couldn't get your hands on anything, and then now it's like, well, is it worth? I don't know. But someday, if I was really doing this right, I'd have fancy DSLRs everywhere, and I'd have the teleprompter. But so we're hopefully, you know, we talked about in the pre-show where we think things are heading in a good direction here. People are getting vaccinated. There'll be some return to normalcy. But what have you been doing during the pandemic to kind of keep your sanity? Have you been streaming anything that's been helpful? I mean, what have you been doing to kind of maintain normalcy as best you can over the last year plus?
Yeah, so I've done a lot of cooking. I got some kilos. I've been doing a lot of cooking.
I appreciate some of the pictures of your cooking, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been cooking a lot. We've been having friends over, trying to keep it safe, but having friends over. Because like before, it was like, you know, you travel a lot, you don't always have time. And when you have time, you just want to make something easy for your friends. But now I have all the time in the world, so I can just make like the most sophisticated dish. And I've been, you know, trying and experimenting and stuff like that. For me, I love cooking. I think this is a very common thing in the tech industry, is people who are in tech, they like cooking, because I think it allows you to just step away from your phone and from your laptop and just do something physical with your hands, right? I like hardware tinkering, so that didn't stop. Now I moved, so I don't have my stuff. You can see like it's a mess behind me, but I had like a local Kubernetes cluster that I built out of a bunch of, you know, small Intel nukes. Nice. So I've been playing with that. I've been doing quite a lot of streaming, so I'm involved in some communities. There are communities in Morocco that I worked with, like I helped like doing talks and stuff like that. There is also a community. We started the Cloud Native Compute Foundation, have their own community group. We started one in Morocco with Casablanca with a friend of mine, and we've been doing like, you know, live streams and stuff like that. And I started the podcast like 2 months ago. So that was so I, you know, since kind of my story became popular in Morocco, a lot of people come to LinkedIn to ask me questions about like careers and stuff, and was it to be in cloud, because apparently I think I was the first one to go public. I was like, I'm a cloud engineer, and people are like, oh, what is this thing? Right? Because obviously most of my audience is from Morocco, like 50% of my listeners from the podcast are from Morocco.
Sure.
And so I decided, okay, well, the easiest way to not repeat myself each time somebody asks me a question is to take this content and put it in a format that is easy to share. So a podcast. So the podcast is called Cloud Careers Podcast. It's cloudcareers.dev, the website. And basically what I do is I invite people and I just record a session with them where I ask them questions about their careers. And these are people who are kind of working in cloud, but maybe not directly in cloud, like software engineers. I interviewed Tam, a technical account manager, colleague of mine from the US lately. So yeah, just trying to keep busy with this. I've done some mentoring a little bit for some, we have this program in Google for startups mentoring. So I did some startups mentoring in EMEA. It was the first time we ran the program in the Middle East, in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So there was some startups from Jordan and from Saudi Arabia and stuff like that, and there was like a tech advisor just helping them kind of figure out things. So yeah, like all sorts of things to just help as much as possible, essentially.
Nice. So it's not a true crime podcast? I thought that was the rule. We all had to start a true crime podcast. Maybe I misunderstood.
No. Yeah, no, it's the Cloud Curious podcast.
No, that's fantastic. I love that idea because I think we need to talk more about that journey. That's part of why I kicked this thing off, was trying to tell the stories behind the technologists a bit, and just appreciate how we all got here, and just to show that there is no one path and that there is a lot of variety, and you can be whatever you want to be. You just have to try for it. And so I think I think that's a fun thing to talk about, and it gives me an excuse to hang out with my friends. So it's a win-win.
Exactly.
But so is there any like habit that you picked up during quarantine that you hope will stick with you post quarantine?
Habits. Yeah, I think napping during the day. It's
Nice.
probably a stupid habit. So actually, one of the reasons why I moved to this apartment is that I can have a big office and I have a sofa now. So now I have a couch in my office
That's
and just take a nap.
I'd love that.
So I just like this idea of being able to disconnect in the middle of the day.
Yep.
So like work the whole morning, have some lunch, and then just take like a 15 minutes power nap. I'm not sure how feasible that would be if we go back to normal, and especially if we travel to customer sites, right? In our office in Stockholm, we had a nap room. So whenever I was in the office, I was able to use it. We could also use the massage room, which when it's not being used. But I'm not sure if I go to like the Goldman Sachs of Europe, if they would have something like that. So we'll see.
Oh, that reminds me, I need to schedule a massage. I haven't had a massage in a year and a half or whatever it's been, and my body is missing that. I miss that routine from the before times, as it were. But,
Yeah.
oh man. Well, let me throw a few lightning round questions at you, and then we'll wrap up, since I know it's evening time for you, and I don't want to take too much of your night away from you. So,
Sure.
coffee, espresso, or tea?
Espresso in the afternoon, coffee in the morning. So coffee, I mean drip or like pour over or AeroPress. I kind of alternate between all these things, or sometimes I just fancy a mocha pot. I actually got my coffee game to be very serious. I brought my coffee game to the next level in the quarantine.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so like I got a proper grinder, like a proper espresso machine, and experimenting with different beans. Before coffee for me, I would just like go to the supermarket and mindlessly, pick up the first cheap package of like grounded coffee.
Nope.
And now I cannot drink that stuff anymore.
Nope.
I'm not sure that's a good thing, actually, because now if we go back to
wonderful
normal,
thing.
Well, but the thing is that the problem I've seen is that if I travel to somebody else's site and their coffee is bad.
That's fair, but see, you just have to cultivate that superpower of finding the best coffee in a given city, and that's
Sure.
part. Just hang out with my team. We'll hook you up. Don't worry. We
Okay,
do
good.
find the best coffee anywhere we go, and that's one of the things I miss, frankly, about traveling, is being able to experience those things that are only in that place. And you find
Yes.
that local coffee shop, you find that amazing place that makes that wonderful bread or whatever it is, and that's something that I look forward to seeing again. Although, to your point, once you get used to having good coffee, you just can't go back. So
Yeah, I mean I mean, just imagine how good I mean, when before this I would drink the coffee in an airplane happily. Now I am not gonna drink that thing anymore.
No, that's desperation right there.
Exactly.
And sometimes you just have to. It's just there's just times where you will break down. But although it does depend a little bit on where you're at, I have noticed that certain airports have better coffee in the proverbial lounge than others. So it does depend a little bit on location. You were saying earlier that about the chicken dish in the gas station, because of course it's very good. The worst espresso you're going to have in Italy is still going to be better than a lot of what you can get in the US. So it's all trade-offs. So now this one, I'm really interested in your answer on this, because I know Morocco has both. So oceans or mountains, which would you prefer?
Oceans. Oh, I'm definitely an ocean person. I don't like. I mean, I make this joke very often. I am not made for cold weathers. Like
And
I do
you
not understand
live where
in Sweden.
again? So, okay, all right. I mean, I hear you. I hear you. I mean,
I know it's ironic, but
I live in
I do
Scandinavia
not.
West. I understand.
There you go. I do not understand. Like we were talking about this earlier. I don't understand Nordics people. I don't understand their love of like winter sports. I'm like, when it's winter, I want to be inside. I am not gonna deliberately, out of my own will, put up clothes and go outside
Right.
and stay in freaking like snow for hours. That's not gonna happen, right? When it's winter here, I time my going out time. I want to be precise, quick, and as painless as possible.
We're in and we're out. Yeah,
exactly.
I understand conceptually cross-country skiing, and I certainly see where that comes from, and I have tried it. I don't mind it, but the thing that I notice with cross-country skiing is I go downhill really well. I go downhill like a rock, and then I get to the bottom and I don't have the ability to control where I'm going, or and I guess if I did it enough I'd figure it out, but then I'm like, it's cold out here, so I'm gonna go back inside. Thanks. So
Exactly.
it's all good. It's all good. How about food trucks versus Michelin star restaurants?
A little bit of both. I think I'm more food trucks. Like for the same reason I told you I didn't want to work in a bank. If you go to a Michelin stars restaurant, you're expected to dress up a certain way. And
Generally.
and in my I have like a very simple like way of living, which is like I am not gonna queue or dress up to pay food to eat. It's very simple. Like all these restaurants that like you have to queue and wait for 30 minutes to get a spot. No, thank you. And all these things where you have to dress up a certain way. I've been to a couple of Michelin star restaurants before. I mean, it's definitely a good experience. You get to like. There is one thing actually I like here in Sweden, and if you ever come here, I'll take you to one of my favorite restaurants.
Yes, please.
Is that we have some Michelin star level restaurants in terms of the quality of the food, the service, etc. But they don't have a dress up code. They are not Michelin star anyway. They don't have a rating, but they are like really, really good. The service is amazing. The food is great. And I mean, you pay premium price. I'm going this weekend with a friend of mine to one of my favorite steakhouse in Stockholm. And it's just like you can just come dress up however you want. They don't care, right? But I think you cannot beat food trucks, right? Like food made out of the street is amazing.
Now, when you say you pay a price, that does scare me a little bit because I know how much the conversion from my dollars to the various kroners typically works, and I think, boy, that must be a very expensive trip to the steakhouse.
Yeah, I mean, I think the steakhouse. When we go, I have a friend that we go probably every 3 months or something. We end up on average paying probably $100 each or something like that. But I think it's not like probably to American standards, it's not super expensive. I mean, if you go to a steakhouse in the US. I've been to a steakhouse in San Francisco. It was average, and we ended up paying like $150 each. Just the steak was $60, which was crazy.
Yeah. You can pay a premium pretty quickly in a lot of spots. So, how about Game of Thrones versus Lord of the Rings?
I have not watched Game of Thrones yet. I was waiting to have my coach to be able to do that.
All right.
I watched The Lord of the Rings, so I like Lord of the Rings, but I'm not. You have to ask me again when I watch GOT.
We'll do. I'll follow up with that one at some point. So, cats or dogs?
Oh, dogs. I don't have any because like having a pet in Sweden is like really painful, and most landlords doesn't allow you to have one.
Sure.
But I like dogs simply because I have two stories here. I grew up with dogs because my grandfather was a hunter.
Okay.
So we had a hunting dog, and there was one that I was emotionally attached to for a very long time. And when I lived in Belgium, one of my best friends lived just across the street from me. And whenever he was out of town, he would ask me to take care of his cat, right? And so that small ball of fur was like it was super nice whenever I'm around because I'm the only entertainment she would get during the day. But whenever the owner is around, she acts like an asshole. So
nice.
So that just for that.
Sure.
I never owned a cat myself. But I would prefer a dog if I have to choose.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Let's do one more. Board games or computer games? What would you rather do?
Computer games. I play few board games. There is this game, popular French game called Taboo.
Oh, yeah.
It's like to make up like words basically, right? And then there is Monopoly. I played Monopoly before. I had the chance to play one board game with some club we have in our office, but really wasn't into it. I think it's like you have to be group, and it's a group thing. I prefer. I'm mostly FPS. I'm mostly first-person shoot games.
Yeah, I hear you there. The challenge I always have with board games is you really need to have somebody who is an expert at how the game works, and you need to have that sort of contagion element to help you through the initial wait. So what do we do now? We go one to the right, and then that does what does that card do? And it can be so challenging when you're first getting started, and then you need to have somebody who can help you kind of over that hurdle. But
yeah, definitely.
Well, my friend, I've taken enough of your time at this point. I know it's late for you, despite the fact that there is so much sunshine pouring into your room, which I'm thankful for this time of year. I miss the sun in the winter, so I'm glad it's back. But thanks for hanging out with me, man. I really appreciate it. It was good to catch up with you, and I feel like we're gonna be in the same physical space soon, for some value of soon.
Hopefully in 2022, probably.
2022 for sure. I feel very confident about that. I'm still guardedly optimistic about events late fall, winter-ish. In fact, I know I saw one event that got moved into December, and I'm like, I'd really rather not go to your country in December, but okay, we can make that work.
Hopefully GFocus happens next year, early next year. So that would be great. I'm actually wearing the hoodie. If GFocus 20, this is the 2021. If the 2022 happens, I'm definitely gonna go. But yeah, hopefully we can meet. Hopefully we can meet in Morocco. It would be great to just go to DevOps Morocco.
Yes, I really enjoyed. I mean, again, very different, very intense, but a very, very cool experience. And I still miss the food and the people, and yeah, it was a lot of fun. So I look forward to hanging out with you again sometime in the hopefully near future, my friend.
If you ever come to Morocco for DevOps, I would invite you to go up to my parents' house, and then we can go eat my mother's food, and then you will see what real Moroccan food.
I'm down for that.
So in 2019, when I was there with Chris Tellinger, Twitter, ex-Twitter, we did a road trip with him and John, one of his friends. So we took a car from Agadir and we drove all the way until the north of the country.
Oh my gosh.
And so he was in my parents' house. We had like food all over the place. They bought some rugs and stuff like that. So we can do something like that.
Well, that's fantastic. I actually have a rug I bought in Morocco is in my entryway right now. So
nice.
Nice. All right. Well, I am off next week. We've got the Memorial Day holiday, and then the week after we have Baruch will be with us, the man in the hat. So we'll have him in the first week of June. So everybody in the U.S., have a good week and enjoy your Memorial Day weekend. And my friend, thanks again for hanging out with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Have a good one.